Good evening, everyone. We're going to call this meeting to order. Our chair and vice chair are not here this evening, so I would welcome nominations from our board for the chair for the evening.
Mr. Temporary Chair, I nominate Mr. Castillo to be chair for tonight.
And a second. Any other nominations? That closes nominations. All in favor of Mr. Castillo serving as board chair this evening, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Chair, good evening.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Noonan. Ms. Goodell, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Ankuma,
Aye.
Mr. Castillo,
Here.
Ms. Gill. Aye. And Mr. Lawrence. Thank you.
We get a motion to adopt the
So-
agenda this evening?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ankuma. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? All right, we have an agenda. All right, now we move to item 2 on our agenda, spotlighting Team FCCPS and preschool food services. Dr. Noonan, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone, members of the board. It is my pleasure this evening to launch our first installment of spotlighting Team FCCPS. We have a number of people in our system that oftentimes go unrecognized or unheralded because of and require some thanks for their service. And part of the reason that they are very good at what they do is because they work as a team. And many of you know this year our hashtag is Team FCCPS. So over the course of the year, we'll be highlighting a number of things that are happening in our school system that speak to the quality of not only the quality of education that we have in our system, but also the quality of people. And this evening, our first installment highlights Director of Food Services, Richard Kane, and what he does to support the students at Jessie Thackery every day. So we have a short video that we prepared for you, and then at the end of the video, if Mr. Kane would come to the front and entertain any questions that the board might have, we would welcome you.
As everyone knows, I love fresh food. And we don't use frozen food at Thackery because, yes, that would be easier. But I believe that from a young age up to a grown adult, that fresh food and all the fresh vegetables, the fresher the better. We take it very seriously that kids learn better when they have fresher ingredients, better food. We prep the food at Mary Ellen Henderson for Jessie Thackery for the simple fact that there is not enough space over there to store food and prep the food in that kitchen. So it makes more sense to prep the food over at Mary Ellen Henderson, where I have more staff to do it, and break it down into smaller quantities. And then Helen takes the food and drives it over to Jessie Thackery, where she preps it, bakes it, or cooks it on the stovetop, and then she assembles it in individual takeout containers. And then we deliver the food to each classroom. The teachers, when we're delivering the meals, put the amount of meals that they ordered for that day with the date outside their classroom. So we'll know who's getting what. If a student has an allergy, it's in the computer system, and then the teachers will also remind us when we get over there. That way nothing falls through the cracks. All the schools have the same menu, which makes it easier. But there are little particulars that we have to pay attention to. For instance, when we have chicken wings on the menu, we have to give the kids at Jessie Thackery boneless chicken or chicken tenders because we're afraid that the little kids may swallow a bone. Little things like that that we as adults probably don't think about, we have to think about with the smaller kids. Parents do not have to worry about whether their kid is going to eat. If you forgot to give little Mary and little Joe their lunch, we are going to feed them regardless. We do not want a single kid to go hungry in our school district. So if you forgot to put money on their account, or you forgot to give them breakfast, or you forgot to give them lunch, when a teacher over there realizes it, or any teacher in this school district realizes it, we will feed them anyway. We will feed them regardless, and we will make sure that they get a nice, healthy meal, the same meal as everybody else eats. Good evening, everybody.
Howdy.
So I'm here to answer any questions anybody has about Jesse Thackeray or the rest of the food service department. Any questions?
Ms. Gill?
So my son was at Thackeray last year, and the change in lunch from the first year he was there and it was being brought in from an outside vendor to when you start bringing it in was so amazing. He started wanting to buy lunch every day, and now he's at Mount Daniel. He says, I can't wait until I get that food I used to get at Jesse Thackeray again. So I just want to say thank you. You made him, and it made my life easier. I don't have to pack him lunch every day. So thank you so much. And my oldest one at TJ is loving your food as well.
Oh,
Thank you. Thanks for all you do.
I'm glad to hear that.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Mr. Kane, everybody appreciates all the hard work you do. I still have extremely fond memories of the day we brought Dr. Noonan on board and the excellent food you had there. So thank you for all the work that you and your team do, and please keep up the hard work, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, now we move to item 3 on the agenda, public comments and requests. In accordance with School Board Bylaw 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to board members and for the record. I have one comment slip here. If anybody else would like to speak, please fill out a form and bring it on up. Tim Stevens, welcome.
Good evening, board members and Dr. Noonan. My name is Tim Stevens. I am chair of the city's Energy Transition Subcommittee, which is part of the ESC, and also a member of the Planning Commission. And I want to wish you good luck as you proceed with efforts to select a design team and detailed plans for the new high school. And I want to encourage you to consider the value of having a building that achieves a high level of energy efficiency and comfort. The feasibility study for the community school took the first steps by properly orienting the building and recommending use of geothermal heat pump technology, or GHP. GHP is long beyond the experimental phase and is now common practice throughout the region and also in places like York County in Virginia, where they've installed it in 9 of their schools and are very enthusiastic about it. GHP, as we learned earlier this year from the study that was done for us by Oak Ridge National Labs and the Council of Governments, will cost more upfront, about $600,000, but we'll recover that money in about 5 years, and after that point, we'll save money for the rest of the life of the building. So I encourage you to proceed with the first step, which is a geoconductivity test to determine if conditions for GHP at the campus site are right. And I'll find out in a few days if the Council of Governments can help us with the cost of that test, and I'll let you all know. Making the building solar ready will involve minimal costs and will enable us to determine at a later date if a rooftop solar system makes sense for us. And making sense means that it should cost no more than purchasing electricity from the grid. So these are 2 things I would encourage you to incorporate as you go through the RFP and the RFQ process. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, we will move now to a closed meeting. Would somebody move us into closed?
Mr. Chair, whereas the Falls Church City School Board has convened a closed, wait, I'm at the wrong one. Sorry, hold on. Pursuant to the, we're already done. Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Personnel under Section 2.2-377A1, in particular, staff appointments, staff reassignments, staff resignations, staff retirements, staff performance, staff change of position, child care leave, long-term medical leave, leave of absence, and advisory committee appointments and resignations. And legal matters under Section 2.2-377A and in particular, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Goodell?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. I anticipate this shouldn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes. All right. Somebody move us back into open, please.
I move that we reconvene in open.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? All right, would somebody please certify the closed meeting?
Mr. Chair, whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, or as Section 2.2-3711, subsection B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification applies, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Thank you, Mr. Ankuma. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Goodell?
Yes, Mr. Ankuma?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
And Mr. Lawrence? Thank you.
Thank you. We come next to item 6 on the agenda, recognitions and reports. Seeing none, we will move to the consent agenda. And I would move for unanimous consent for adoption of the consent agenda. Seeing no objection, we will move to item 8, future agenda topics. Dr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, we have 8.01, community use of schools on the future agenda topics. This was brought to us from Mr. Reitinger as part of our chairs and vice chair meeting. We have, as we set forth on working towards building this new high school, one of the things that we want to ensure is a seamless opportunity for our community to engage in the use of our schools, to include even looking at it through the lens of architectural design so that we can separate the community from the public spaces as necessary, or from the school spaces as necessary. However, what we found, and we've got a couple of people that have been working on this, that our system that is in place to allow for community use and how you sign up is a little bit opaque, and so it needs some revision. So what I'm recommending as this future agenda item topic comes up is that we put it on for a work session where we can explain more in detail what the issues are and how we may be able to resolve them going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. Any questions? Right, I would say one of my recollections from our visit to Wakefield was the system they had that was very well designed for segregating public space from private, and I think we'll be able to do a great job on that. And I think having a system that will then allow us to allow for community use will be a positive step forward. So thank you, Dr. Noonan. Now we come
So
to.
would you like us to put that on as a work session topic?
I think that seems to be a consensus issue, so yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, any other topics for future agenda items? Okay. We come now to item 9 on the agenda. The first is 9.1, the Weldon Cooper enrollment projections. What does the crystal ball tell us, Dr. Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. This evening, I'm going to invite our Chief Operating Officer, Deidre McLaughlin, to take this agenda item and talk to you about what she's learned working through Weldon Cooper.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. What I want you to first know is that the report you have is actually a preliminary report. When we dug into the numbers, we found some discrepancies. They're very minor, but we wanted to get it exactly right. So they're going to rerun the numbers. They'll change slightly, but I think it's a useful report for starting to look at what enrollment will look like in the future. Weldon Cooper is seeing continued growth at Falls Church City Schools.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is there any way we can put the slides up on the screen?
Good.
John can do that. Mr. Brett can do anything. He, by the way, did that video.
And it was extraordinarily well done. Good job, Mr. Brett.
Why don't I just give you the overview while
Sure.
he does that? They are expecting that the growth to be pretty constant over the next 5 years at a slightly slower pace, but there. They speculate that last year's somewhat lower than projected growth is in part due to a large graduating class last year and a relatively smaller entering kindergarten class. There are fewer students transferred in last year than had in the past, or into this year's cohort. We lost some students between kindergarten and first grade, and affecting the longer term is Northern Virginia in particular, and Virginia generally, has had, again, a somewhat lower birth rate than it had been having. So that'll have some impact on the out years, but that won't have any impact on the 2019 budget. While we're getting there, maybe we could start with what Weldon Cooper does is they lay out a series of charts, and they show you the FY18 enrollment numbers, which are the ones that are slightly off the actual. And then they project forward. So you can see that they're projecting a 61 additional students in 19 over the actual of 18. However, when you adjust or make the adjustments that I believe they're going to make to 18, the spreadsheet that I handed out tonight to you all that looks like this, it's at your place, and it'll be put up on Word docs tomorrow.
There you go.
Would show a additional 73 students based on what we know to be our actual 18 enrollment and based on what their unadjusted 19 enrollment. So this is the 15-year projection, and then if you go to the next page, John, this is their enrollment trajectory for Falls Church City Schools, and you can see that this year was sort of a pause in the enrollment growth, or it wasn't a pause, but it wasn't as steep a growth as you have been experiencing, but it is expected to continue at a pretty good pace through this period. And for us, this is another chart. I don't know how useful this is, but you can see if you look at 17, that last chart, the last line of that chart, you can see certain grades, for whatever reason, that the students didn't go into the next grade at the same rate that you might expect. I mean, I think you usually expect 100% of the students, or nearly that, and very often it's more than 100% because kids come in during the year, go on to the next grade. So, you can see where a few of the spots were that were somewhat unexpected. What we are going to do with this in the very near term is, first of all, get an updated projection from Weldon Cooper based on the precise September 30 numbers. And from there, then we start looking at how it will affect the budget. We'll apply our planning factors to the students grade by grade and see where we will have to add or possibly reassign staff in schools. And that, of course, is probably the biggest piece of any school's budget, is the cost of enrollment growth. So will be something we'll do at the very beginning of the process.
I'd add just one thing to her presentation, and that is for the benefit of the community. What's nice this year is that Weldon Cooper in the back, the last page of their document, they did line out what their methodology was for the 15-year total school enrollment projections. That's not something that has been clearly delineated in the past, so we're very thankful for them for putting in that information this year.
Yes, that's true. And these are the standard methods that are used to predict school enrollment growth, the most predictive ones.
All right, thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Any questions? Mr. Lawrence.
Sorry, just one, not for you, probably for the superintendent. I mean, the way I read this, and this is just going back to Mount Daniel with our 660 cap, I mean, the way they're projecting, we're not going to hit that for 10 years. I mean, that seems to be a good change, but still, that's a bit of a change from last year, right?
Yes, that's correct. I saw that as well, looking at the 2026-27 timeline of 649. That is something that we're going to be continually paying attention to because of that 660 cap and looking at moving the second grade in 2 years to Mount Daniel. It does buy us a little bit of time in some ways to get the Thomas Jefferson addition done in a horizon that makes sense within the next 3 to 7 years.
Yeah, no, it's great news. It's just very happy to see it.
Ms. Gill?
So I know that, I don't know if you have the answer to this, I know that one factor that can really dramatically increase or decrease our population is State Department children. And I don't know if they look at the impact of reduced funding for state and the fact that they're doing buyouts, if that's, we think that, I see right now we've actually had a decrease in Oakwood from last year to this year, if they factor that kind of thing in at all.
No, they don't, or at least as far as I know, they don't. And but I do think that's built into your history, because those sorts of things, you know, what happens in the world affects this region. And so you have in your history ups and downs that are unrelated to birth rates and population growth. So I think they catch it in that sense, but no, not directly.
Other questions? So I've got a couple. Overall, I know sometimes Weldon Cooper's missing it either a little high or a little low, but what's the track record average out to for the accuracy of their forecasts over the last 5 or 10 years?
I don't think we've used them for 5 or 10 years. I think we've only used them for several years. And I'd have to research that. I can't answer that. I'd be happy to. But I know that they're very respected demographers.
Well, yeah,
I would have to go back. Lisa, you might know how many years, but I think it's 2, 3, or 4.
Okay. Well, it would be good to hear
Happy to look at
how
it.
they're doing.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing that I would say, from what I can tell on slide 3, that one of the red and the blue, it does look as if it's pretty steady, but that it is going to be constantly increasing. Does Weldon Cooper look at Falls Church in any special way, or do they
No.
they basically just use
They
the
use an
same
algorithm,
methodology?
a statistical model that they use, and no, they don't. And I think the other thing they do tell you when they send these things is you can't rely much, once you get out a couple of years in these projections, it's anyone's guess, really. I mean, they're just using a mathematical model to carry you forward. But so much can change, and it could you should, you know, you really would not want to be doing long-term planning based on these long-term projections. The only thing that I think that larger divisions factor in is major development. And if you have a major development that is going to come online in this school year, well, then you would want to factor that in.
So this does not factor in projects in the pipeline right now?
No.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, we'll move on to item 9.02, approval of participation agreement with J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. Dr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also going to turn this one over to Ms. McLaughlin, but before I do, I just want to say that I've now come from 2 school divisions that have used P cards or procurement cards as part of their strategy to create efficiencies in the purchasing services department. And fortunately, when Ms. McLaughlin came in, she, along with the finance team, made a decision to move that direction as well. In order for us to find some efficiency and some effectiveness in that program. So as she talks about it this evening, I just want to set the table with part of this is to help us become more efficient in our processes.
Yes, that's exactly right. And again, thank you. What a P card is another word for what we would call a credit card, but it's not used for credit purposes or financing in a school division. And what it will do, it will both simplify the purchasing process and it will make us more efficient, and I believe it will also give you opportunities to save money. As it is now, we can only deal with vendors who will take a purchase order or will bill us. And as a consequence, it rules out many other sources of purchasing goods and services. And in particular, it makes it very difficult to purchase things on the web, which is where so much purchasing is happening, and probably all of it is going to go to in the not too distant future. And there, the only method of payment is a card. So it'll give people many more options. It'll be faster. People will be able to make their purchases as they need them. And they will be able to get best quality and better prices as in the future. On the finance side, the efficiencies really are significant. And what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to tie the individual holder's card to their budget so that the charges are automatically going to go to a school's budget, relieving the finance office of getting a monster bill from Home Depot and having to sort through and manually enter where all those charges go. So that's probably going to eliminate, I would say, 3 to 4 full days of work a week, because we'll use them with Amazon and in particular, Office Depot. It will significantly reduce the number of checks written to vendors, which costs both us and the city money. I mean, we recently did a big check run. It was like 170 checks. And I asked our finance director, how many would we be cutting if we had P cards? And she thought it would be like a 60 to 70% reduction, which is really significant in terms of workload. And I think the only other thing worth mentioning is, are they safe? And the answer is yes, they're very safe. And the way you make them safe is you put dollar limits on what each purchase can be and dollar limits on the total you can charge during a buying period, a 30-day period. And you can block merchant codes, which we will do, so that, I mean, I don't think anybody would, but you can't go to an ABC store, you can't go to a florist, you can't buy things that are not things that we would use at Falls Church City Schools. So the reason you're here or we're talking about this is the participation agreement requires, and Tricia can explain this better than I can, but it requires you to give the superintendent legal authority to enter into the agreement.
That's exactly right. The superintendent needs your authority to sign this, and then the board clerk would also sign as the participant attestation. So I've had a chance to go through this with Deidre and speak with JP Morgan Chase and review all of the many, many attachments that are part of the Fairfax purchasing card agreement that we would be riding on.
Any questions? Mr. Nkuma?
I have one. We're doing this through Fairfax County?
Yes.
Any privacy concerns here?
No, no, we're not doing it through Fairfax County. We're riding the Fairfax County contract, so we don't have to go out to bid.
Separate.
Separately.
Okay.
And we're riding the same contract that the city is riding.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? How many people are going to get these?
When you start these sorts of programs, you keep it kind of on a smaller scale, and see how it goes and see where you have problems. And so I would say principals, assistant principals, directors who would have a need for them. And then there will be cards that aren't named to won't have an individual's name on it. It will be Mount Daniel Elementary School. That'll be checked out and checked in as needed at the school.
So, a couple of dozen, it sounds like?
Yeah, probably. Maybe not a couple of dozen, maybe, yeah, but, between 12 and 24, I think, would be fair.
And what happens in the case of fraud or disputed charges? Is it like a credit card? We're liable up to $50?
No, I think you don't have quite the protections you have as an individual credit card, and the way you build in protections is you make it so that nobody can get very far with it. And, I think the maximum, it's all written into the regulations that there can be exceptions for different purposes, but nobody's going to have a more than a $3,000 limit. They're not going to be able to charge more than $3,000
Okay.
at any time.
All right,
Yeah.
well, thank you. All right, if there are no questions, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board authorize the superintendent to execute the participation agreement with JP Morgan Chase Bank N.A.
Thank you, Ms. Gills. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ankuma. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? No. All right, well, thank you. Now we come to item 9.03, the draft legislative package. And Dr. Noonan or Ms. Minson, take it away.
I'm actually going to turn this over to your legislative liaison, Ms. Gill, who is going to present the draft legislative package that we discussed 2.5 weeks ago or so with Lilla Wise, who will be serving on your behalf at this year's legislature.
Hi. So a lot of these I think we've seen before. Many of them we're sending back again. Topics I know of interest to the community. We're once again asking for flexibility to start, set our own calendar, not be bound. Some new things on here you'll see. This mandate that we support a legislation that would establish a school health advisory board to advise the General Assembly on pending legislation concerning health policy that affects elementary and secondary schools. That's driven by the fact that there are often mandates that come out of the General Assembly that are passed down to schools with no money attached to them. So some of these are health related, for example, like a requirement that everyone receive hands-on CPR certification. It's extremely expensive to roll out as a school division. So the Health Advisory Board would review requests like this to then say, is this something we can really push down to our schools? And if we do we need to attach funding to it? Up above, you'll see that we do support the full funding of standards of quality and all new mandates passed, and that we do request that if there is a mandate, that we receive funding to implement it. There will be redesigned high school graduation requirements. We request that we delay the implementation of those because they won't come out until much later in the school division. There won't be time for the divisions to implement the new requirements before they take effect in September 2018, so we'd like to push that back a year to give us time. I think those are some of the big ones. We continue to not support diversion of local taxpayer funds from public schools to private schools, so vouchers in particular. And these are, our legislative positions are ones that we share with Arlington and Alexandria as well. So we work on this as a team. It's not just Falls Church City going out asking for these requests. And I am hopeful that in the new General Assembly that we may have a chance of getting a little bit further with some of these than we have in the past. We'll see.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Any questions?
I have a comment, if I may.
Absolutely.
Just that, first I wanted to thank Ms. Gill for her work with Lila to put this together, but also wanted to make sure that I understood the timing of it. We're about to go down to the Virginia School Boards Association conference tomorrow, and as you know, with Ms. Gill acting on your behalf, she'll be part of the caucus that will look at the state school boards' legislative packages as well. I assume that their legislation will reflect pretty similarly many of the things that you find in this package, just like the Virginia Association of School Superintendents supports a legislative package each year, and many of the topics that are there are also covered. The one thing that I would like to put on the radar, perhaps not for this year, because I don't think the timing is right, but now that Fairfax County Public Schools, sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, if you will, has achieved the opportunity to start school before Labor Day. I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to perhaps think about what it might look like for the City of Falls Church Schools to start a week before Labor Day, not this coming year, of course, but down the line, considering the fact that many of our teachers that work in our systems are parents of students that go to Fairfax County Public Schools. So in some ways, there is a child care issue for our employees as well. So just something for consideration for the future.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Gill. You did touch on something that's interesting. When this was formulated, it was before the election, and when you go down to VSBA, will there be a revisiting of the agenda in light of maybe things look different now?
I don't know. I mean, I know that when I talked to Lila, that we go out with our positions regardless of the composition of the General Assembly. So our positions don't necessarily change based on how favorable we think that the legislators will look upon these. I know Marcus works very hard, Delegate Simon works very hard to, on our behalf for a lot of these issues, but he doesn't often get a lot of traction. So we put them forth every year. And I'm hopeful this year some of these we may see some. We're still Northern Virginia, though, so still a bit biased against us.
I did notice there, in terms of funding, in terms of the formulas, that and SOLs are not here. Is anything changing there, or what?
I mean, it's underfunding. We do. We would like to. I thought she had included the. Looking at the index. That we. I think the LCI. The third one, yeah. So we are seeking more money come back to us. We send a lot of money out and don't get much back. So I think we are hoping that we can maybe get some more money back.
Right.
Especially when they have a new mandate and we get that everyone has to hire another kindergarten teacher, and we get a very, very small amount of money to actually fund that mandate here. We don't get funding for a full kindergarten teacher. I think that sometimes can get lost. People think that we're getting money for a full teacher, and we'll get maybe a couple $1,000.
All right, well, thank you, and I wish you luck this legislative season. Now we come to item 9.04, second reading of policies. Ms. Minson.
Good evening. We have 3 policies up for second reading tonight. The first is proposed policy CBCA, disclosure statement required of superintendent. This would be replacing policy 3.8, economic interest disclosure statement. There were no proposed changes from the last time this policy was presented, when it was presented for first reading. Are there any questions on CBCA? Hearing none. The second policy for second reading is policy GCPF. It's suspension of staff members, proposed to replace FCCPS policy 8.34. There are also no changes for this policy from first reading last month. Any questions? Last policy for second reading is GCPB. This is resignation of staff members. It would combine our former policies 8.62 and 8.72. And for this one, there were also no changes from first reading last month. Any questions?
All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Chair, I move that the school board approve the second reading and adoption of the following policies: CBCA, disclosure statement required of superintendent; GCPF, suspension of staff members; and GCPB, resignation of staff members.
Thank you, Mr. Ankuma. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? Seeing none, we'll now move on to the first reading of items. Ms. Minson?
Thank you. We have 8 policies for first reading tonight. The first is policy BBBB, student representative to the school board. That would replace bylaw 2.15, student liaison to the school board. I did have the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Hills, Mr. Laub, and our student representative to review what process had been used in the past and what the school wanted to see going forward as far as the appointment of a representative to the school board. And I know I did receive an email today, thank you, Mr. Lawrence, with questions about whether that was an intentional change from the SGA selecting a candidate or the principal selecting a candidate. That was a decision that I think in the past 2 or 3 years, it has always been up to the principal to select, and that did not go to the SGA. What Mr. Laub did want is for the student representative to be a member of the Student Government Association, so to report back to the SGA, to be able to share with the SGA, and to be a representative member on that board. Am I capturing that correctly? So as proposed, this policy looks a little bit different. You can see based on the redlining, the changes that we've made from the proposed VSBA policy. Everything in red is what we're proposing to make Falls Church specific, and this was at the request of both the principal and the student government, current representative to the board and the student government advisor. It makes clear that the student rep represents the interests of the students, participates in the discussions as appropriate, and can be assigned research and data collection as desired by the board, but they're not a voting member. We also did add in that the student can receive community service hours as allowed by the George Mason administration. Any questions about policy BBBB?
Mr. Lawrence?
Well, just one thing for people to think about. Yeah, it seems that the selection process sort of fell off from our original intent, which was the principal and the superintendent agree on a slate of candidates that went to the SGA, and then the SGA put forth their candidate. The idea was to get buy-in from the student body for the student representative. And in the last 2 years, that really does seem to have dropped by the wayside. So I would like us to consider putting that back in, because the idea is not just to go in and handpick someone by, the principal, but to get the students to say, this is who we want as our representative. So as we go toward second reading, let's think about that.
Well, we actually discussed this, and why we didn't want that was because Mr. Laub said, all SGA elections are popularity contests, and there may not be the best kids who actually want to participate in this type of activity. So that's why we didn't want to have an election style of picking a student representative.
Well, no, the idea isn't a student government type of election. It would be the student government picking from a slate of candidates. It wouldn't be the no.
One of the challenges that came up that Mr. Hills also raised when we met was the timing for selecting a student representative and for the SGA general elections. The SGA elections aren't until later in the school year, and in the past there have been candidates who would be interested in being the school board rep but also wanted to run for president or vice president of the student body. So the idea was, as far as the timing, the student representative to the board would be selected by the principal in advance of the SGA elections, and then that person would already be, as part of the Student Government Association, wouldn't run for office to serve as one of the voted positions by their peers, but would still be a member of the SGA. So if, as far as I recall, and Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hill's one of the student representatives selected, and if we waited until the SGA for the upcoming year were elected and then selected the student board rep, that would change the timing of things and change who those candidates could be. Other candidates who might be interested in being student rep wouldn't have submitted their name in time or would have already pursued other positions with the Student Government Association.
Okay, if you could come back with what that actual timing is, since,
Sure.
you know, obviously none of us are in the high school SGA, or at least not that I know of.
I will speak to Mr. Hills about that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, next.
The next policy is EBA, Buildings and Grounds Inspection. This would be replacing former policy 4.29. Our policy 4.29 had a number of pieces to it. It was building and grounds, inspections, maintenance, management, and dangerous conditions. As far as the VSBA model policies are concerned, they break it out into buildings and grounds inspection and then building and grounds management and maintenance. So the first policy for today is EBA, which is building and grounds inspection. Comparing that to our previous policy 4.29, almost word for word, the first paragraph of our policy 4.29 is included. There was some language saying that the school board delegated to the superintendent the responsibility of maintaining a program of preventative maintenance. That has been removed. I did look into that a little bit. I think it's because under the Virginia Code 22.179.3, under the express powers and duties of the school board, it's maintaining a program of preventative maintenance. So I don't recommend adding that language back in from our policy. As a practical matter, certainly the school board does direct the superintendent to maintain the buildings, but that is, I don't think that's the delegable duty of the school board. So I think following the language exactly from the VSBA is appropriate. It's only that first paragraph of policy 4.29 that is reflected in this new policy EBA. The second, third, and fourth paragraphs would be reflected in the next policy. I'm going to read policy EC. But before I get ahead of myself, any questions about policy EBA, buildings and grounds inspection?
You know, feel free to continue on the building and grounds front, but remember, we did skip over DC, so we need to circle back to DC.
Okay, wonderful. And I know Deidre's excited about that because she's on board for explaining DC to everyone. The next policy that follows from our 4.29 is policy EC, Buildings and Ground Maintenance and Management. The first two paragraphs of this at lines 5 through 10 are virtually word for word from our previous policy. The one policy that is in EC in red, or the one sentence that's in red, would be taken back from our policy and added back in, and that states that any employee who discovers a dangerous condition shall report the condition immediately to their supervisor or the building principal, or the designee where the dangerous condition is located. I had a chance to speak briefly with Mr. Lawrence about that today via email about what is a dangerous condition. In speaking to the principals about this policy, I think it does make sense to impose the requirement on our staff that if they have a concern, they raise it to the principal. Dangerous condition isn't defined in this policy, and that could be up for debate, but as a practical matter, after this policy, if it were adopted with this language, after the policy is adopted by the board, it's incumbent upon the principals to let their staff know, if you have a concern with the building, you do need to let me know. So it would provide additional protection for the board and help keep our students safe. That certainly we hope staff would do this anyway, but now we're directing them that that's part of their job responsibilities is to report conditions so that we can make sure that our buildings are safe. So other than that addition to the VSBA policy, it very much aligns with our previous policy, and would welcome any questions on that.
Any questions? Mr. Lawrence.
Sorry, and this one didn't occur to me when I asked you all the other questions before, but
Sure.
in the second paragraph where it talks about, maintaining documentation of pesticide application, which makes complete sense, why does it not include something like, I assume we use fertilizers, on the same sort of places where, toxic chemicals would have concern? I mean, is that dealt with somewhere else?
I do not believe that's dealt with to my knowledge, it's not dealt with anywhere else. I do believe that is under Virginia Code 22.179.3 for the duties of the school board. Let me look.
Okay, if you want to look and get back to us,
That's not a requirement, but that is something that we had in our previous policy, and I think it makes sense to have there. to the extent you're proposing adding something else, I could look into whether fertilizer is something that the board would want to add documentation of that. It might be something we already do, but I could talk to Sevi and see.
Yeah, I mean, if, it just seems like the bottom line is if you're applying some sort of toxic chemical in and around where kids are on a routine basis, you want to know what it is and when it's put down and why. And I don't know if it would only be fertilizers, but that just, immediately comes to mind with kids running around and, on grass under trees. So yeah, if you could just look in and get back to us, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Other questions?
There is a code provision, 22.1, 132.2, talks about integrated pest management on school property, and that the Department of Education makes available for school boards how to appropriately address application of chemical pesticides for pest control.
That's not fertilizer, though.
Right? Okay.
Ms. Minson, given your obligations to train staff, your training would include informing?
As part of, at the beginning of the school year, yes. And the principals have asked if I would prepare summaries of policies once they've been adopted and they can pass it along to their schools through their regular emails to staff. So I will be doing that as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
The next policy is policy FE, playground equipment. This follows very closely our previous policy 4.35. We did add proposed language in accordance with adopted budget that the school principal would have the authority to order the repair and removal of school property. Otherwise, it is almost word for word from our previous policy. The final sentence of policy FE, that's at lines 14, 15, saying consideration should be given to designing outdoor learning environment to support classroom learning, was not something that was included in our previous policy, but I think makes sense to keep in there if the board so desires.
Any questions? All right, carry on.
Next is policy FECBB, our former policy 4.32. It talks about accommodations for individuals who are disabled. Our previous policy had broken down what the federal accessibility standards were and had referred specifically to uniform federal accessibility standards or the ADA or whatever the most current comparable federal standards are. I don't think it's necessary to include those outside sites. I think having a very straightforward sentence that our new buildings and our renovations and alterations are going to be designed to accommodate disabled persons as required by law is sufficient. So it's a little bit more straightforward than our policy had been, and it certainly we would expect that all of our new building and all of our alterations would welcome all individuals of all abilities. Any questions on FECBB? Next is policy JL, fundraising and solicitation. It would replace our previous policy 9.53. It's similar in many ways to our previous policy, although the language is different. We also did include a reference to other extracurricular activities in our policy that isn't included in here, but I don't think it's necessary. There also was a provision from our previous policy, 9.53, I guess our current policy 9.53, talking about funds from advertising and what is necessary to solicit advertisements from merchants. I think the new policy is straightforward and does make clear that elementary school students don't participate in door-to-door solicitation, that students are not, their class grade is not, cannot be changed based on participation or non-participation in fundraising, and there's the expectation that before fundraising activities take place, there's the express permission of a principal that the fundraising can proceed, which is something that we'll make sure that we provide training to staff and principals on. Any questions on policy JL and fundraising?
Well, I'll have a question for you. For
Sure.
example, the snack bar at the stadium, is that fundraising?
I believe, and I don't know, Dr. Noonan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that different boosters groups do engage in that. It's the parents who, and sometimes students who participate in that and raise funds for one of the sporting teams or one of the choirs or the bands. And also, I do know that there are bake sales at the high school, and those raise money, and that they keep track of that money and let the principal know about that. Because under the policy, principals are supposed to maintain a list of the funding and report that to the superintendent, who reports it to the board, which we'll make sure is done going forward.
Ms. Gill, do
I just had a question if this related to Jump Rope for Heart. So that's something I know they do during the school day, but that money goes to the American Heart Association. And I always had a question about that. I mean, I have no issue with the American Heart Association or raising money for them, but I just question the doing so during school time, and that the kids are asked to come home and ask their parents for money to give to the American Heart Association. And then I think kids sometimes feel like a little bit bad, they don't get a prize, like we have our charities that we donate to, so we don't necessarily give to the American Heart Association for Jump Rope for Heart. So I didn't know how that falls within this as well, because it's not fundraising for the educational benefit of students in their schools. It's fundraising for an outside organization.
And that is allowed, but we'd want to make sure that that's closely monitored under the policy. It's approved in writing, it's carefully monitored. To the extent that there are rewards for classes for participation, that's something that should be discouraged. If it's something that students want to engage in, they can, but it certainly can't impact their grade, or if their refusal to participate can't impact how they're viewed in the classroom. But I don't think there's anything in this policy preventing the raising of funds and then donating that money to an outside organization.
I'd raised this a couple years ago when I first got on the board, when my son was in kindergarten and this first came up. I don't know, it just struck me as something, we don't fundraise for a lot of organizations in school. How was this one chosen? I know it's a long-standing organization, we've done it for a long time, but I thought it might be worth revisiting whether or not it really is appropriate, especially at the elementary school, just an appropriate thing to do, and how we vet the charities that we give it to. And,
So, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair,
Dr. Noonan.
may we, between first and second reading, we'll go back and have a conversation about that, and perhaps if we have some other questions that come up, we can coordinate with Ms. Gill and others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, if for no other reason than clarification, this policy would seem to be talking mostly about fundraising for the school division's benefit,
Right.
and not addressing other activities outside that. So the second sentence, I think arguably assumes that the first, you're all talking about the school division. So I think that would be a good gap to fill.
yeah, I thought this almost precludes doing something like Jump Rope for Heart, because the funds are not we are not raising funds for the educational benefit of students in their schools.
Okay, great.
Second to last policy, JEBA, admittance of children younger than 5 years old to kindergarten. I worked with Ms. High on this policy, following up on the work session last month at the direction of the board that you all wanted to see what that policy would look like, what the provisions would be. So this policy would be an addition. It's not a VSBA model policy. This was based on Bristol, Virginia's policy, where students whose birthday fall between October 1st and October 31st can be admitted to the school division at no charge, provided that there's a written request by the parent to the chief academic officer by May 15th of the preceding school year. The child's evaluated for kindergarten readiness by a certified educational psychologist at the expense of the parent, using the standards in lines 19 through 22, which would be cognitive, language, gross motor, fine motor, social and emotional skills of the student. The discretion of the principal, the parent can be interviewed and/or the child may be interviewed, and the school personnel can deliver a readiness skills assessment if they would like to, if the principal deems that necessary. One point that Mr. Lawrence raised in an email today was whether the recommendation at lines 20 to 21, whether it's the school psychologist, the principal, and/or the chief academic officer, or if just one of those individuals makes the recommendation to the superintendent, but the decision of the superintendent is provided to the parent or the requester by July 15th, and that decision is final. This is a new policy for the board. It's certainly open to any questions you could have, and if this is the direction the board wants to go, happy to make any changes you like or answer any other questions about this proposed policy.
Any questions? Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, the only thing I raised, it was just unclear who was actually going to be the one making the recommendation to the superintendent, because you had 3 people reviewing, and then it just said, who will make a recommendation to the superintendent? So I just asked that get clarified, because otherwise, do you have 3 people and they take a vote, or do 3 people review and then one person makes the decision and recommends? But that's the only clarification I asked for.
I could add it.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I guess another question that I would have is, under subsection 1, you don't have to be a resident of Falls Church by the time you make that request, right? It's only, the only residency requirement is by October 31st. When do you have to move in?
You would have to move in by the time
Enrollment starts, right?
enrollment starts, so I think we should add that. Let me see. Paragraph 2 says the child must be 5 no later than October 31st, but it would seem to imply that as long as they're 5 by October 31st, they could be a resident starting October 31st. So I think we should add that in the first sentence. Admittance of children who are residents of the City of Falls Church and have not yet reached their 5th birthday by September 30th.
I guess another question is, how are you going to get the word out about this? We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but
Certainly, once the policy is up, it could be up on the board, but Dr. Noonan?
yeah, Dr. Newman.
Yeah, once we get this finalized, we certainly will get the information out through Mount Daniel and through Jesse Thackeray, which are most likely going to be the best places for that to be sent out. We'll also put it up on our website, and we'll have it available at central office and other schools as needed. We'll share it with the PTA.
Any other questions? All right, drive on.
The last policy for tonight is policy DC, which I'd welcome Ms. McLaughlin to explain to the board, since this is a policy that comes from finance. Thank you.
OPEB or other post-employment benefits is something that accountants really get into. They love it. But we'll make it as simple as we can, and I'll be as short as I can. Falls Church City schools, like really most schools, at least in this region, promise employees that after, within certain parameters, that when they retire, the school division will make some payments or contribution towards their health insurance in retirement. So we do this, and what we're essentially doing is creating an obligation, a payment, an obligation to make payments in the future. And school divisions and municipalities, the city is no exception, has to report the value of this liability in their financial statements in order to satisfy bond rating agencies and other financing organizations. And because you're reporting what can be a sizable liability on your balance sheet, if you fund that liability in an orderly fashion towards the point of being on a strictly pay-go basis, then your financial institutions look on you favorably. So we have an actuary, well, we don't. The city has an actuary who comes in every year and estimates what our future liability will be, and says, okay, over a prescribed period of time, which is typically 20 years, how much do you have to contribute every year to have it fully funded at the end of 20 years? The city's been doing it. We've been accepting what the actuary has said is our liability. We've made contributions precisely as the actuary has asked. But evidently this year, I was told by the city that the actuary is saying that unless the school division has their own policy that states they will fund the actuarially determined annual required contribution, that they will use more conservative estimates in estimating our liability than they will the cities, and we would wind up not paying more over the 20 years, but paying more in the short term. So this is a housekeeping measure, if you will. It's not going to change what we do. We're going to continue to do it. We would be doing it whether the city told us to or not. It's just, we've got an obligation. You have to report it, and you have to fund it. So this is satisfying the actuaries who do the measurements.
Got it. Any questions?
So, just to be clear, this liability, this ongoing liability, was that something that you say we were funding or recognizing?
We're funding it, much like you would a pension obligation. Yes.
But we didn't have a formal policy about how we did it.
Exactly. We didn't have a policy, but we've been
we're doing
been
that.
doing it, and we're going to do exactly the same thing with the policy.
Okay, so just making sure we wouldn't have an adverse budgetary impact going forward.
No.
Okay, we're just
avoiding
recognizing
it.
something that we're doing. Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Any other questions? So this is, okay, so, looks like we're good on our policies. So now we turn to item 9.06, is there a? Oh, excuse me. I thought since it was first reading, we could just keep going. I would entertain a motion for item 9.05.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve first reading for the following policies. BBBB, student representative to the school board. EBA, buildings and grounds. EC, buildings and grounds management and maintenance. FE, playground equipment. FECBB, accommodations for the disabled. JL, fundraising and solicitation. JEBA, admittance of children younger than 5 years old to kindergarten. DC, other post-employment benefits funding.
Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right, well, thank you.
Can I have a go back?
Dr. Noonan.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick go back on 9.01, which is the Weldon Cooper enrollment projections. In February of 17, thank you for sending this to me. In February of 17, there was a presentation about the high school that was done publicly, and the FCCPS enrollment projections versus actuals was prepared and shown at that meeting. We have been working with Weldon Cooper for approximately 5 years. The average yearly percentage variance between the actual and our projected enrollment is 1.81%, since that was a question that came up. So it is a very, very tight, a tight algorithm and a tight projection percentage. So.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Noonan. Now we come to item 9.06, the superintendent update on the George Mason High School project. I would just initially thank the community for their support of the referendum. We've done a lot of work over the past several years looking at concepts and test fits and designs and possibilities. And now with the community's support, we're entering the next phase of what that looks like. It's not going to be a quick journey. It's not going to be an easy journey, but at least we now have a path forward. And Dr. Noonan, tell us what we have to look forward to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me also begin by first saying thank you to the City of Falls Church and for coming out so strongly and supporting our bond referendum. Up here, you'll see these were some of the charts that were posted at one of the parties that was going on around town, and you'll see the referendum's passage by ward and includes the absentee as well. So with 63.6% of the voters saying yes to the bond referendum, we feel very good about that pass rate and want to say thank you. Some specific people that we want to give shouts out to, and this isn't meant in any way to miss anyone, and if we do, we don't mean to do that, and we thank you as well, but we certainly want to start with the City of Falls Church School Board. Your work for the last near decade, for those of you that have been in the City of Falls Church that long, has really pushed this ball, if you will. I hate to use sports analogies too much, but it really is sort of getting the ball across the finish line in terms of getting the referendum and the money and financing in place to be able to do this work. So thank you for that. Also want to take a second just to thank the City Council. It took all of us together, the two bodies within the city, to make this happen. The Falls Church City PTAs came out in strength and worked hard on behalf of the school bond. So did the band boosters as well as the athletic boosters, and we want to thank them. The Falls Church Education Foundation, while not directly involved, were also instrumental in supporting the schools like they always do, and we thank them as well. The Falls Church Chamber of Commerce came out, yes, we want to thank Yes for Falls Church, and lots of other individuals and groups that put themselves out there knocking on doors, shaking hands and talking about the work that needs to be done to really continue to make the City of Falls Church a spot of excellence. I want to give you two views, if I can. The first view is sort of these larger milestones, if you will, over the course of the next, say, 2 years to give you a sense of what we're sort of leading up to. And the first one is we're going to go out for qualifications. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide because I do want to spend a little time talking about what that means in the context of the Public-Private Partnership Education Act. As we go out for these qualifications, and this is an opportunity, and I won't get too deep yet, this is an opportunity for us just to see who has interest in perhaps working on the project. Between November 30th and January 17th, the community is going to have an opportunity to provide some input for what is in the proposal and how that may relate to the next phase, which is the request for a detailed proposal. And this is where the actual RFP for the design is being done. That design process will go from February 22nd on through May. And again, there'll be lots of opportunities for the community to give some input around the design process. And then we'll move into the selection, and that selection is who is the design team and the build team that we believe will do the best job for us in building us a really great high school. And in 2019 of July, construction will begin. So those are some of the big milestones that we're looking at as we begin this process going forward. You'll note in this that it's an ambitious timeline. And I want to just say that it's an ambitious timeline for a number of reasons. One is I think that this community has done an extraordinary job historically of talking about what their hopes and dreams for this new high school will be. We have dug through document after document after document dating back that decade from community meetings to designs to past RFPs that have been out there to past documents that really suggest strongly what it is that the community wants. So that leads us to this semi-aggressive timeline to really get these RFPs out, to at least get some qualified applicants in that have some interest in building our project. So the next slide really lines out what the next 6 months, so if we've sort of seen the big picture for 2 years, let me kind of give you some milestones for the next 6 months, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here. The request for qualifications. And let me back up here just a little bit to say that in 2015, the school board adopted the PPEA, which is the Public-Private Partnership Education Act process to use to build a new high school. In the PPEA, there are 2 phases to the RFP, or request for proposal process. The first is what some might normally call the request for qualifications, or the request for information. That's the first phase in the RFP process of the PPEA. That phase simply is getting qualified people to consider getting into the next phase of building the high school. So we are looking at gathering information in the first part of this RFP process on November 30th and putting out the first portion of the RFP, which is the request for qualifications or request for information, based on a lot of factors. First is the history and the conversations that have been held over the past several years. The second piece that we're looking at that go into this request for qualifications, or the first part of the RFP, are the ed specifications that have been documented in the city schools for several years. In fact, they were adopted in 2015 by this school board. The third is that this RFQ reflects the standards of quality that this school board and the community have put forward over the last several years for what their building requirements would look like inside and outside. The RFP process Phase 1 is completely consistent with what has been put forth for the feasibility study. So when Perkins Eastman was selected to put forward the feasibility study, they were given a program, the academic program that outlined what are the things that we want to see in our high school, what do we want to make sure is there, what do we want to make sure we get in. And then the last is, it's this request for qualifications portion is consistent to a great extent with what was adopted via the referendum on Tuesday of last week. So we know what the site looks like. We have a test fit of what goes there. We have a really good sense from the history of what would go in that building. So now we're going out just to find out who has interest in our buildings. So that becomes the Phase 1 of the RFP or qualifications that will go out on November 30th. Once that posts, and that will be a public document when it goes out, we anticipate having at least one and maybe two community input sessions about what was in that RFQ. Now, we are using historical documents and I say historical, leading up to just 2 weeks ago of what is actually going into that RFQ. So it's current information and some historical information. But what we'd like to do is during that qualifying period, if you will, is to invite the community in to give us some input about perhaps what is missing, right? We've heard from the community. We know that we need a new competition gym. We know that we need an auditorium. We know that we need fields. We know that we need a system of walkability, a system of transportation that works and the like. And we've incorporated that in based on the conversations that the community have had. And so now what we want to do is just put it out there and make sure everybody understands what's in this initial RFQ to see if we're missing anything. And then at that point, when we get that feedback, we will go into the request for detailed proposals in around February 22nd. Now, when we get these first round of RFQ or RFP Phase 1, we may end up having 15 or 20 companies that are interested in bidding on the high school. The reason that we ask for these qualifications is because those 15 or 20 that are asking for permission, if you will, to bid on our high school may or may not be qualified to actually do the work. So what we are going to have is we'll then have a selection process in place to be able to take that large number of RFQs, or requests for qualifications, and winnow that down to three to four. We'll determine what the right cut is at the time, but really to limit that field in February. So we would shortlist those on February 13th. When we shortlist those proposals, we will still have an opportunity based on the feedback from the community from the end of November to January to modify and tweak technical aspects of the final detailed RFP that is going to go out to those shortlisted qualified applicants who are going to bid on our project. So that tweaking would happen in that time frame, and then we would issue the detailed RFP on February 22nd, and those would be due back to us on May 17th. So there's a couple of, it's a lot of talking, and it's a little confusing because of the way the PPEA is written, or at least it is for me, because of having not worked under a PPEA like this before. But the major close confuser, if you will, using some SOL language, is that the RFP contains two parts. It's the qualification phase, and it's also the detailed phase. And so we are entering into the qualifications phase, excuse me, now, based on the information, it chokes me up every time, based on the information that we have gleaned from the community over the last decade or so, but mostly within the last 6 to 12 months of what they're looking for. But there will be lots of opportunity for input from the community about what the final detailed RFP is going to look like that won't go out until February 22nd. So we have quite a large window of time to make sure that when we cut that list down of that large number of people that are going to be interested, we can send those qualified applicants out with what our community really desires and needs within our school. Again, I think we have a really good sense of what that is, based on the conversations, based on the space that we have, and based on some test fits, but we just want to make sure we've got that right. So anyway, the long story short is we've got some work ahead of us. I'm looking forward to the work. I'm pleased to say that we are all in this together, and are going to work hard to make sure that we deliver the very best high school to this community in the summer of 2021. So with that, I will.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. Any questions, comments? Okay. Well, I'll ask one. The development is going to be a key part of this. How does that plan fit with the development component of the project?
That's a great question. There's a couple ways that I would like to address that. The first is, my hero has brought me thank you, sir. There's a couple ways to answer that. The first I want to say, oh, wow. You guys take good care of me up here. Thank you. I will get to your question, I promise. The first is, let me say that the underpinning of relationship is extraordinarily important in this process. And Mr. Shields, who was in here before, the city manager, and I have been able to cultivate, I think, a really strong working and collaborative relationship, much like the city council and the school board have been able to do. But as the two people who are going to be working most closely with, one, the development of the school being me, and Mr. Shields working so closely with the development of the 10 acres, we have already begun a process to talk about what would the governance structure of that look like, so that these two projects, while they're working in some ways on separate tracks, will be collectively reviewed and discussed to make sure that decisions that are made on the school part, because we are going first, don't have an adverse impact to the development down the line. And one of the ways that we're looking at developing that governance structure is to have a school side function team of operational folks, a general government side of operational folks, that would then be linked by a steering committee, and that steering committee would include members of the school board, members of the city council, planning commission, and some other folks. Those details are still being fleshed out, but let me first say that it's our intention to make sure that we have a strong governance structure that makes sure that what we do on both sides, the general government side and the school side, are working in tandem to make sure that we put forward a good process. One of the things that we are asking for with any of the design teams that we're working with is that they also have someone on their staff that has a commercial background, so that as they are reviewing plans for the school, they can also share it with a commercial person on their team to be able to articulate what the hope and desire is for what we're trying to do on the commercial side as well. I don't know that I'm actually directly answering your question, but I'm giving a lot of information. And then the other part of it that will be absolutely important is thinking about how just the beginning infrastructure of the site is going to look. And so we've already started to talk about mapping street grids and the like. So there's a lot of coordination and a lot of collaboration that needs to go on between myself and the city manager, as well as the school board and the city council, and I anticipate that those relationships will remain strong, and we will continue to not lockstep, but certainly march forward towards creating a comprehensive site that meets the needs of both the schools and of the city. Absolutely.
All right. We now come to item 10 on the agenda, the superintendent's report. Dr. Noonan.
I'm going to keep this short because I've been talking a lot this evening, but again, I just want to thank everybody who's here, first of all, for coming. It's always nice when we have folks in the audience who are engaged and part of the process. The second is I had a great opportunity today to observe the RICU at Thomas Jefferson. Some of you might be familiar with the NICU at the hospital or the ICU at the hospital, but this is the RICU, which stands for Reading Intensive Care Unit. And this is an intervention program at Thomas Jefferson that's specifically designed to meet the needs of some of our students who are not performing at the benchmark on the developmental reading assessment. And they're getting some really great opportunity to work closely with a reading specialist. But it's just another way, I think, that our schools really have been able to develop meaningful intervention processes for our students by name and by need to make sure that all of our students are successful. So just wanted to say, if you have a chance and you get into the schools, you may want to just check out RICU. The last thing I'll say tonight in my brief comments are I look forward to seeing some of you down at the Virginia School Boards Association meeting. And that, of course, the plenary session begins at 2 o'clock tomorrow and will go through Friday. So if you're looking for us, that's where we'll be, at the Virginia School Boards Association. And I'll be down there with the superintendents, making sure our school boards don't get in trouble. So look forward to seeing you down there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Noonan. Mr. Ankuma? Just your updates, or we can, if you'd like, and go down to next. Sure.
Go right ahead.
Take it away.
Okay. Last week, our football team unfortunately lost in the playoffs. But the coach this year, he's doing a great job. I'm also attending the Virginia School Board Association student workshop in Williamsburg. This will definitely be a different experience for me, because I usually do Model UN and not state level things. And a lot of students have been giving me complaints about the lunch line in the school. Some students say that it takes the whole lunch block to, traverse through the lunch line. So yeah. That's it.
Have you passed that on to Mr. Hills?
Yes, Mr. Clark, not Mr. Hills,
Okay.
but I've had talked to one of them.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you. Mr. Ankuma?
Okay. Was at a Special Education Advisory Committee meeting yesterday where we welcomed 2 new members, and they've got a full plate. Looking forward to some of the good work they're going to do this year. Was unable to make the last joint PTA meetings, but I was at the last Band Boosters meeting, and they're going places, literally. They were at the Carnegie Hall last year, and this year, in the spring, they're planning to go to Chicago at the Bottling-Brook Auditorium. So stay tuned for more in that space. And just like a student liaison, I will be representing the board, hopefully with another one of my colleagues and the superintendent in Williamsburg in the next couple of days at the VSBA annual meeting. So.
Thank you, Mr. Ankuma. Ms. Gill?
Well, I will be joining you at that exciting conference. So I have all 3 of my committees, health and wellness. I'm really excited for them. We applied for a $1,500 grant to promote walkability in the schools. It's not going to go very far, but the committee's really been great. They've been working with the city to get information on how we can promote safe routes to school and how we can do giveaways with local bike stores and really encourage kids to walk and bike to school, which kind of also ties into the high school project, because the more kids we get walking to school, the larger our radius can be and the fewer buses we need. So it's a win-win for everybody. Athletic boosters, they are really working on engaging the community, so they've been doing a lot of programs where athletes come to elementary schools. They're even going to hand out schedules for winter sports with a coupon on the back for a free drink if you go to the basketball games. And they're having the kids from the different sports come to the schools, I think on Wednesday, and be out at recess with them. So they're doing a lot to try to foster a sense of community. And then peak, there's a lot of concerns around planning time and things that I know that our administration is doing with it, none of which I think really rose to a school board level.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Mr. Lawrence?
Just a quick update. The foundation had their board meeting last night, and I think the biggest news in the last month, and you've all heard about, was the super grants. They gave out over 130,000 in grants. Todd Hitt, a local developer, had set up a fund of $100,000 specifically for the arts, and they gave away more than 80,000 of that, plus 50,000 of the foundation's own money. So students, teachers, students certainly, pushed them to do it, but the teachers really came up with some fantastic ideas. So, 130,000, which is, even for the foundation, a lot of money, and they're looking to do more next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I was out of town last week, so was not able to attend the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. I'll be going to the BIE meeting on Thursday morning, which has a good deal of energy and enthusiasm and direction. I think we're going to see some great dividends from the relationships that we're cultivating with our local area businesses. And finally, I'd just like to thank the citizens of Falls Church again for their support on the referendum. We will take that backing and move forward with it. I think Dr. Noonan has set out a good path forward, and we will be looking to develop the school that our students will need for the decades to come while operating within the constraints of what's appropriate and what's necessary for our community. So I think it's going to be a great journey forward, and I thank the community for that strong vote of confidence again. So with that, we move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is approval of minutes. We have various minutes to approve, and I would seek unanimous consent to approve those minutes. So without objection, they are approved. We have some materials for board review pertaining to enrollment and dwelling charts. Don't know if you have anything to add about those, Dr. Noonan. If you don't, we can move on to the next item, and that is our second closed meeting. Before we move into that, I think Dr. Noonan will be, how long for that? And I don't anticipate that we will be doing any public business after that.
We will not.
So
It's going to be about an hour.
So we will be coming back here and basically adjourning after that time. So with that, I would ask someone to move us into closed.
Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter, real property under Section 2.2-377A3, in particular, disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Goodell?
Mr. Ankuma?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
And Mr. Lawrence? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to meet right here, so.
And we'll be meeting to join us.
And in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711, Section B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully. It's disappeared.
Uh-oh.
The half reading.
I don't know where you went.
Wait, it's coming back,
Come
coming back.
Yep.
You need mine?
Yeah, do you have?
Okay. Rolf? One, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies. And two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Ms. Goodell?
Mr. Ankuma?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill? Mr. Lawrence?
We are adjourned. Thank you.